Today we're going to speak with Brad. Brad is starting up Structure AI. Structure AI is just 6 months old. Brad has a history, 7 years of IBM and other big names. So hello, Brad. How are you today?
Hi. Good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, most welcome. Yeah, so impressive experience. I noticed you launched Structure AI 6 months ago. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Structure AI and your role there?
I would love to. So for Structure AI, we are an AI consultancy. We are industry agnostic, which at first it's not really a recommended thing to do. If you're going to do it that way, make sure you can back it up. And that's one of the big things that I first recommend for, founders. If you're going to go in with a business, find your niche and then focus and then explode over time. And so, you know, there's different ways I'm navigating around that, but I'm going to peel back and just say, so we are focused on implementing the few pillars of AI and technology adoption within businesses. And then those are very high level pillars. So we can start from a business who has nothing, but then we try to typically tailor our services more targeted throughout the engagements that we do work. So what we like to do is we have an AI readiness assessment, which gives us an idea of where to start in the business, how to start providing value. Are there any export control issues that we have to deal with? Do they have anybody or a group of people that are assessing the technology that's coming out and helping or guiding them through bring these tools in, but leave these tools out? Of course, even with technology and everything, you need to have responsible and ethical guidance around that. So we also help with that level of practice. And everybody is at their own stage in the journey. So there's always a lot of tailoring of services. There's also employee training. So rather than having you have to figure out, I need to use all of these resources, kind of constitute a rough employee growth plan. We'll just kind of highlight everything for you and then help train up your employees over time. That way you're always maintaining that continuous growth. Generally most effective when implemented in turn with the performance management. So really what we do in a nutshell is very abstract in a sense because we've been doing AI for so long, I suppose. But what we're doing right now is we are engaging customers and then along the way, kind of repackaging that in something that's more consumable and understandable for everybody, rather than trying to say, we're just going to engage everybody with these really abstract ideas.
Understand. And how many people consist your team of at the moment?
So right now we have myself and a business partner. We may be welcoming a friend in the future. And then we're also working with a few lead gen companies. And so that's where we're at the moment. And especially towards the beginning, if you start noticing the momentum, it's just all about building and compounding on top of that momentum. And so, we've been running a few different campaigns for just a couple months now, and we've actually gotten some really good feedback. So then, we're also taking a look at our personal lives and being like, well, okay, we have these troubles. We need to adjust for risk in the business so we can be bringing in money sooner in a controlled fashion by doing X. And so, that's kind of how I account for everything.
So your startup basically influences your personal life or personal finances as well. You are shifting funds in order to scale the business.
Yeah, it's always a fine line. And so you never want to invest so much and then watch it blow up in your face, right? But what you want to do is controlled investment, how that investment starts to pay off in the in the short term, and then realize and reapportion risk as you're going on. Because say, for example, my roof is going to need replaced in a few years. I got to get my back porch resanded and everything. And let's say that certainly this rain in New York is not exactly helping. Learn to keep track of the different life cycles of the things around you. You say, okay, I have my back porch needs to be repaired in, say, this time frame. I need to get my roof replaced in this time frame. My business needs to be doing this by then. Also, it's even a question of, can you solely within this single business get up to speed in that time frame? Or are there other actions that you should consider outside of that, coming at this more from a point of view as an investor rather than a single business owner, and think about if you own a portfolio? And I'm also taking some other risk adjustments outside of that to make sure that the situation ends up as I want it to in the
Mhm.
long. You try to do a little bit more fishing, so to say, just to
Yeah,
make,
understand.
because
Understand.
yeah, otherwise dynamics, the most likely way that dynamics are going to get if you don't adjust appropriately is you're going to fall just short. Nobody's going to be upset, and then it's going to be your problem. And businesses kind of have a way of these epic failures in people's faces. So you need to be careful and adjust for risk early.
Absolutely. Fully agreed. Is that something you learned earlier in your career already or just recently? I mean, until mid of last year, you were a long-term employee at IBM, which is a great corporate setting where probably your activities were like very narrowed down. So how easy was it to adjust to the new challenges as a startup entrepreneur?
It's the behaviors that guide the adjustment, right? And so as long as you're willing to learn, and the quicker you learn, the quicker you just start to breeze through and compound everything. And that's really what I've found to smooth out the transition, rather than just saying that learning from the people around you is good, and that's great for the people that learn that way. But it can be particularly rough on your situation, your relationships, and, I'd rather just work hard, breeze. Well, I wouldn't say breeze through, but I would rather have a smoother sail by working a tad harder. And so that's just kind of, I would say, my secret to getting through that. I think over time, it's a realization. You try a lot of different teams out and you start to see everybody's very good, and you start to gain perspective on what time frames that different businesses are going to move in. And then you eventually find the ones that are going to go like right now. And so that's kind of where I've learned to focus my time more. And then I've also just found along the way, I'm like, well, it's good, but say this business will take a tad longer than something else. So let me give you an example of what I mean. My wife works in structural engineering. There, that's just construction. Everybody understands construction. But if you're talking about AI, nobody understands what that is. And so while there's this explosion, there is also a matter of people are still to understand it and learn about it more necessarily sometimes than actually implement it inside the business. And even then, they may not understand how much it costs to really do it well and have the money apportioned to do it well.
Mm.
It's always an interesting balance that way. You don't want to. I've certainly had the case where I've come in too high, but you don't want to price yourself too low. And it's always a challenge. So then you learn over time. I've got to spread myself over more businesses just because I'm being unreasonable in my pricing. If I try to get this much out of this relationship, it's just not going to work. It's not fair to them. And you kind of learn that over time.
I get that. So you are testing out the market, noticing objections and adjusting your approach on pricing.
The way I like to say it is that for startup founders is you have to prove everything in the market. Your offering, your website copy, none of that has been proven at all. And the only way to prove it is to go to market and see if somebody will pay you.
Mhm. And
You
it
know,
just from there.
yeah, I mean, you'll get people reaching out to you at some level saying, "Hey, I'd like to partner with you. It looks like you're working on some interesting stuff." It's a validation that you're going in the right direction,
Mhm.
but not the it's not the true data that I'm looking for of, okay, somebody's going to pay me for that. You want to gear that all around. Is somebody going to pay me for what I have to offer?
Mhm.
Is that's kind of the true validation that we're trying to go through.
Do you feel you are early in the market talking about AI and many people are talking about it? Almost no one is really understanding it. Do you think you are like early in the market, or do you think now is the time? Or do you think you're like so early in the market that there are no budgets from corporations yet for something that has to do with AI?
So it's always a particular challenge because I can't even begin to tell you the number of businesses that we're trying to target, each of whom have a different profile, right?
Mhm.
And so there's some places that I've had similar ideas as, and they're like, oh yeah, we're already at 100 million in revenue. So to say that they're early wouldn't be correct. But for other places, they have no idea what's going on. And even relative to the tech industry, some people are just looking for stuff that's simpler, and that's okay. They're not looking for tech that's going to fold on itself every couple of years. They're just looking at a solid distribution that's, say, going to help them grow from 75 million to 100 million. And then
Mhm.
they're reset and then look at next steps, what else they need to do in the business to grow. And that's really kind of what I've come down to is I worry what different stuff is going on out there, but I can only approach the specific use cases in front of me
Mhm.
that I'm gonna work on. And so, that's definitely made life easier in a way because you're focusing a lot more.
Mhm. So how
So
much brainstorming would you recommend for, let's say, a first-time startup entrepreneur? Where's the thin line between overthinking and going in too early?
one of the biggest things I do is the market research. Make sure that there are people doing stuff out there very similar to you and are making money off of it. One of the biggest things I've seen so far is, say, for like the AI consulting, I know all of the big tech companies are making record profits off of it this year and continuing with it into the next 2 to 3 years are going to continue to actually buoy their revenue just based on doing the AI consulting. So I'm like, well, okay, there's a market for it. Perfect. Then you start digging into it more, and that's where you start to say, okay, well, here's what this market looks like currently. Here's how much this market is going to be in a few years based on how much money there's available. Say if we want to capture 20 million, if the market is increasing by like, say like 30 billion or 40 billion, and you're only looking to capture, say 10 million, that's a reasonable number. Say if you're looking to capture like 100 or 200 million and the CAGR over the 5, 7 year period is yielding like 3 trillion. Well, it's statistically at the industry level, but if I think about it and break it down from a mental model, even breaking it down amongst different people within industry, I should still be able to garner this much money within the business. And so that's kind of how you do the risk adjustment. So usually what I'll do, I'll write up like a plan or a pitch deck. And then based on the potential size of the business, I validate it against an increasing number of people. And so, for example, I've come up with like $1 billion business ideas or multi-billion dollar business ideas. And so the first thing I'm doing is, okay, well, I need business partners because I can't work on something this big on my own.
Mhm.
Then, you know, I will take the idea to like, say, two or three advisors. And then I say, what do you think about this idea? And they'll be
Mhm.
like, man, that's great. I love it. Or tweak it in this way, make things more realistic. But yeah, this stuff would be really helpful.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Now I built up, in a way, an advisory board because these people are now willing to help me. Okay, can I get access to 10 to 15 more first time customers or people who could be and get their opinion and talk through it with them?
Mhm.
And then you get more feedback. And so, in a way, it's just a matter of talking with people about your idea, getting that continued validation from people who would actually be your customers.
Great answer.
I was doing stuff in project management, and realistically, by the time I was done, I probably talked to like 10 or 12 people just to be safe.
Mm.
And even then, that's only like starting. You want to get in touch with 100, possibly 200 or more, because that's going to be the continued validation that's going to really start to show the market need. And then you just keep going. And so over time, going from, say, an alpha to a beta to a GA product, it's just that continued market validation. Now, if you're going to the market with services, you can typically do it a tad cheaper. I mean, I'm not really spending any more than $500 a month on structure AI. Yeah,
Mhm.
no, it's very low to the ground. So you can just go straight to market with some very basic stuff.
Mhm.
And so, you go out, you make an ask and just start to see what people think. And, there's a lot of people interested in talking. So you just keep going.
Mhm. Yeah, finding the right advisors or coaches or consultants for a startup might be helpful to validate the business model. Yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah. And oftentimes, too, this is where things can get interesting as well, because business is probably one of the most beneficial pursuits for the economy. But we also have to acknowledge that everybody's going to want their fair share. And so if you're kind of starting your first business and you're needing to get a lot of help from people, you probably are going to have to sacrifice equity along the way to
Mm.
really win the game.
Mm.
But the thing is that once you get on the other side of all of that learning, you'll be able to help other people out and you'll be able to really take fees from that. You'll be able to really start to build business portfolios. And so a way that I think about it is, would you sacrifice one business to gain access to the full swath of potential for what you can do in the future?
Absolutely. How much of equity would you give away for advisors and VCs?
I mean, for VCs, it's a little bit different because they're typically going to be deploying a large amount of capital if you talk about a more traditional round. I usually do relative to the amount of effort I think they're putting into the business and then adjust accordingly. If I sign a contract, I'm expecting to get diluted down to like 10% ownership by the end. But the way to handle with your learning and such is to only go for the funding that you need to, and then have the resources to be able to maximize that funding in the shortest time frame possible. And so I think that's where some trouble can come into play, is that people, one, aren't necessarily used to having to figure out all these terms and conditions. It's an art form unto itself. And we also aren't used to having to manage this large an amount of money all in one place. And so, you kind of end up needing more people, but the startup isn't ready for that. And things can get a little hairy, but I've found it easier to be able to do a lot of learning on my own. That way I can really, you know, put my full will into the business and really help it grow more on its own. And so, I've also got in contact with groups of people that immediately, once any money drops whatsoever, I have numerous different people at numerous different price points that I can invest into to get a return out of that will grow the business even more. And then it becomes a matter of, knowing the right people to rely on, and then making sure that you know, making sure that you have a strategy to, maximize the efficiency of the business.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's interesting because when you get your first customers, if you have 15 grand, you can invest 15 grand however you want. And you want to take a step back, look at your personal situation and say, if I give my 15 grand to this person, they're going to be able to do this for me, which is more of what my personal situation needs right now, and which will then stabilize the business more. And so that's kind of what I'm always looking to do is stabilize the business, get it growing, and then just continuing to step through and, getting it to the point where I'm ready to, integrate another part of the business. Another thing to consider is that, you don't necessarily fully have to do a consulting for equity model. You don't have to do a fully upfront model. You can also do pay for performance.
Mhm.
And I personally prefer either pay for performance or a consulting for equity because one, you can tell those people are a lot more confident about their skills. Two, you pay them on the backside instead of the front side,
Yeah.
which is always helpful. The art form there is that you have to come up with, KPIs that you influence within your control and that get paid out within a reasonable time because more traditional KPIs, the business might need to gather data for a month. Or if you're consulting for equity, you may not see that payout for 5 years.
Mm.
So it's always a matter, you get into the balance of, okay, I need to have this much money, but, it's also more efficient to tie up my money in my business because then you get capital gains instead of personal income tax. So it's a tricky equation. You need to make sure you're liquid enough to be able to support the situation, but not liquid enough to have to pay extraneous tax.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, what would you say was the biggest challenge for you as an entrepreneur?
I think the biggest challenge was finding a lot of great people, and then I just needed to find the group that was both right now with an idea that was right now, and it took a little bit of time, but
Mhm.
start.
Finding the right team.
Yeah, I mean, every every idea and every team has its own nuances.
Mhm.
And so you can work with people over different time horizons, which is fine. But when you're just getting up and running, you've only got so much time, you've only got so much resources. You need something that's going to go now, and you need some people who are going to help you get it done right now. And so
Absolutely. The
that's
right
definitely.
people. Got it. And if you would give one advice for first-time startup entrepreneurs, what would that be?
Personally, I would say just keep at it. Make sure you're always, I don't want to say rushing headlong into new problems, but just always try to find yourself faced with new problems as you're growing, because that is a sign that everything is working. If you're
Mhm.
faced with the same
I
problem
like that.
month after month, that's not good. That might be a sign. That's a sign that something's amiss in the business and that you can go address it. But if you're always constantly facing new problems, that's, especially in early stage, that's the sign of growth, which I love.
I like that a lot. That was the perfect closing sentence. Thank you so much, Brad. Very insightful.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brett.
All right. Bye.